How is everyone doing?
Hello.
Good. Hi. Well, thank you for joining us today. I would just like to highlight that we have Karen joining us instead of Dowdy, and also we changed the name of the panel to Diversity and Inclusion Actions for the Grassroots Community, as we're not an all-Black panel, so we wanted to kind of represent different views in that section. So a quick introduction, I'm Jess. I founded my own radio and TV PR company last year, and I've worked in the independent sector for about 10 years now. Angel, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, I'm Angel Joseph. I present BBC Music Introducing in Suffolk, and I'm also part of the BBC Introducing national team as well as an artist.
Karen, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name's Karen Abdullah. I am the head of Outer Agency, an agency that's based in Berlin, although I work remotely from there. Also have been a promoter for about 10 years or so, mainly based in Brighton and many other things, but we can get into that later.
And Lucy, do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Lucy Atkinson from Earth Agency, booking agent. Been in bands and stuff like that before, but yeah, I'm doing booking agent and management now for artists.
Great, so let's get into it, shall we? How much and how little representation is there in the grassroots community for POC performers, crew, and gig goers? Personally, from my perspective, I think there is representation. But there's a lack of cross-pollination within scenes. I feel like promoters don't do enough to widen their network of contacts, which means they have the same rotation of acts and the same recommendations going around. And that doesn't really promote diversity, because if you're going in the same scenes and with the same people, you rarely kind of reach outside of that. Would someone from the panel like to comment?
Yeah, I can jump in, as maybe my experience as a promoter is more relevant here than the current booking agent part, but I guess they're all connected. When I first started promoting, I was definitely aware of the lack of diversity around me at every level. There was really not many people in the venues where we were operating who were diverse. And then that kind of, but this is kind of a reflection of the place where I was operating, and Brighton is a very white city. There just wasn't, a lot of these things, they don't happen in a vacuum. They happen in the context of the place, which is like quite white. So you're not going to have as much representation there. But I kind of felt like then that had an impact on the type of music that we ended up gravitating towards, because that is what people were after, and that's what we thought was the thing to do, which would be the most successful. So it ends up being this kind of vicious cycle of, you start off with certain intentions, and then you kind of find yourself in kind of the belly of the beast and the cogs in the machine, and you just kind of accept it for what it is. So then that's when complacency happens, and maybe you just don't push things forward in the way that you should.
Angel, do you want to kind of comment on that? Because I know when we had a quick chat the other day, you mentioned that not only are you on radio, but you're a performer yourself, and you do a lot of promotions.
Yeah, I definitely agree with both points made there. But I feel like when it kind of comes to festival season, that's the only real time you'll see a mix of genres, a mix of different people, a different audience as well. It's like they kind of go to all these different things throughout the year, and then we have to wait for summer to be on the lineup with other artists and performers, and that's kind of where the promoters will meet other people. But yeah, I guess I don't know if it's a blame thing, but I think I put on gigs myself, and one of the things I do is make sure I'm looking for those people that I want to see on the lineup, as we all do. But even if I've got to reach out a little bit more and kind of hold off of booking someone, I want to make sure that it's the right person for the fit. that the audience can connect with and other people can find and book another time. But in terms of, you know, having the same lineup all the time and the same people, I think it's a discussion that needs to be had with venues and not just the booking agencies, but I guess the flyer, the whole marketing around it. I think if it looks great and is visually pleasing, it can be circulated in all different spaces. So you might not necessarily want to go to see an indie punk band, a full lineup of indie punk. But if the flyer speaks to you, you might go there just as curiosity, and now you're a little bit more open-minded, and you might not like it at all, but that might garner some kind of conversation that I don't want to see this, but I want to see this, so I'm going to go and do this. And I think that discussion needs to be had and needs to keep formulating, and it will roll in and it will diversify, but it starts with being open-minded and making the audience open-minded as well.
So Karen kind of touched on genre as well, and that's kind of something that, you know, we will touch on later in the conversation. But I want to know, like, how difficult it is, you know, when you're as a promoter, like, you're programming a specific genre. So as a booking agent, do you find it that your artist, this one's for Lucy first, do you find that your artists will fit inherently into certain lineups, but it won't cross-pollinate and fit into a kind of like diverse lineup? Do you tend to choose lineups that are very much focused in one genre, or do you find that you can kind of put your artists on like on a lineup with a variety?
I try and put my artists forward for a variety of lineups. Sometimes when I do have Black artists, they'll get asked to play on like hip hop shows when they're making alternative pop. Like, literally that happens, and I'm like, have you listened to what the music sounds like? And they will literally just judge them based on what they look like. But yeah, I think as a booking agent, you definitely need to look at your roster as a whole and look at it. Is it diverse enough? Like, is the music diverse enough? And put everybody forward where the sound actually just works. But I don't know if everybody is really conscious of this when it's obviously something I've thought of my whole life. But often I'll put forward an act and they'll be the one person of color on an entire lineup, because I don't know, maybe they're making music that isn't considered Black music, so it's more palatable. I'm not sure. Yeah.
I'd like to come in there with that one, because there has been recent discussion around the word urban, and I kind of, that's been such a cop out to put people on lineups and call it we're not going to call it a rap night, we're not going to call it an urban night, but it's urban. So again, you have loads of different genres, but they're all Black, or you just have a hip hop night. And, you know, there are some venues where you can't use the word hip hop, rap. You know, I've been to gigs where I'm suddenly like a vocal wordsmith, or I've seen the craziest things on lineup. Just say it's a rap night, or just say it's live music. No other genre goes through that situation. So I feel like because of that word urban, it has made those things really, really difficult to worm around. But yeah, I don't know what you guys think.
Do you guys think there's like a stigma with Black artists who aren't making Black music? Like, I've worked with a lot of Black artists that make like alternative music, like, or folk music, and they keep being categorized into urban just because they're Black, but they don't make Black music. And I think a lot of people really struggle to get their head around that. Do you think that's like a barrier, essentially?
I would argue that most music is Black, but you know, that's a whole other story. I think it's a bit of a dog whistle, and I think what it contributes to is this kind of sort of segregation of like, what is it that it really means when you talk about a Black person who doesn't do Black music and stuff? What you mean is that you want to bring in certain people you want to gatekeep, because and you know, obviously this is a panel about venues, so I'll be talking about venues a lot. what it means is that you're essentially gatekeeping and you're kind of picking and choosing before people even get there. So if you call it an urban night, then you're kind of prepared for, that possibly there's going to be a heavily Black crowd. But if you call it something else, then you're kind of like gatekeeping and just making sure that those sort of people are included. And I think when you talk about Black people who play non-Black music, as someone who, I'm a hardcore and punk kid, and I was in like hardcore and punk bands when I was younger, and I was often the only Black person at all of these gigs, and it was very much like it's the Black girl from the punk gigs. You do get a sense that this stuff isn't for you. So I think you have to look at historically, there is a history of us not feeling like we belong in those spaces. So I think that feeds that narrative of like the Black artist that doesn't play Black music. It kind of continues that narrative of like people being put in their place in some way,
And
I just think, and also then what happens is every time you have a gig, that band, because you're the Black girl from that band, you are then booked every single time because we need to make the lineup diverse. So then they end up being booked every single time.
There's an air of tokenism in that though, which I've been talking a lot about tokenism recently, and I kind of feel like doing things like that is kind of performative, because you'd think that if that's like one step in trying to make a lineup more diverse, but also you're not really doing anything to expand your network in a way and like find other artists that could work in what you're in at your event. Like, has tokenism come up quite a lot for you guys in terms of like grassroots venues?
Sorry, I can jump in again. No, not really. It's not really something that I've experienced that much. Maybe when I was in a band, there was definitely this, not maybe, it was definitely like, and this was back in Portugal in like the mid 2000s. Not that it excuses it at all, but still today, we kind of joke between friends. It's like, remember when that promoter said like, oh yeah, with the Black girl in the band, you'll definitely get the gig because that's kind of cool. It's like a Black girl in like a punk thing. It's kind of like that. That's interesting. And even though that was like in 2003, I think that mentality still remains. But personally, as a booking agent, from the booking agent side and from the promoter side, I haven't really, it's not something I've experienced.
In terms of like venues, go on, Nick. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I think maybe we should just mention this. It's probably obvious to all of us, but like as booking agents, when we go to any of these conferences or events, we are the token most of the time when we go into the room. You need to look at behind the scenes who's working on the events. And like I was just trying to think of women of color promoters that I could put some of my artists forward for, and very, very small amount of people that I could think of that existed that we could work together on with some of my acts. So I just feel like that's worth an honorable mention there as to why the lack of diversity happens. Yeah,
for sure, because if you don't have those people in place to kind of orchestrate those events, then nothing will translate essentially. Because again, going back to people staying in their networks, not having, I was trying to think of female promoters in London that I know who are POCs, and I couldn't think of anyone. And then, that speaks to the bigger problem that if you don't have access to certain networks, then that's not going to translate in the lineups that you put forward. I wanted to ask, like, going back to venues again, I wanted to ask, do you think that certain venues get known for putting on specific genres in terms of grassroots? And Angel kind of touched on this before, but like, because a venue may become known as a certain genre when they put on some like a night that's different, like a hip hop night, for example, that can kind of cause friction. Is that something you've experienced?
I'd say go
on. Well, at my agency, we represent a lot of artists that make grime music, and I'd say the discrimination with the genre in regards to venues, all the grime artists will get asked to fill in, I think it's maybe stopped now, that 696 form, and have literally had like shows that were sold out get canceled like the night before. And we'll put in artists that play white, non-black music. That was probably derived from black music in the first place, but will not get asked to fill in that form. So yeah, that's a deterrent for sure. And obviously the security at the venues can be a deterrent for people of color to want to attend. Yeah.
Angel, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was going to mention that form as well. So thank
Okay.
you. But also living in Suffolk, obviously it's a really rural area, and outside of London, when you have venues that support black music, it becomes an amazing space, and it becomes a really positive conversation for black artists. And what starts off as maybe a booking agent booking a gig turns into friends of artists wanting to be involved in the music industry. I want to do that. And I've seen, we've got pubs here that you wouldn't think they would have black artists come on the lineup, but they are really open. And you got that kind of stigma with the pub goers are not going to get this, but when you have an open-minded pub, it's now become a really like quirky space where they'll have grime and hip hop, whatever, and any kind of music, and it becomes a space. So then the hip hop artists or the black artists will constantly go there, and it becomes a really positive space. And then it makes the other venues look bad when they put these nights on, and then they have security, and then there's forms and all these different things where you can just go to that place that gives you that safe feeling. So there's negativity there, obviously, when you have to do the negative things, but also for the artists when they don't have to do that stuff, and a venue allows them to express themselves who they are without making them fill out forms and whatever, assuming there's going to be trouble. It can create a beautiful moment that you can get all that experience in these rural areas, in places like that, for you to then come into bigger places like Birmingham and London. I really appreciate that from venues.
I think that's really, really massively key, because it also, it's talking about local scenes, and it's talking about representation in those areas where, people might not see, black kids might not look at other black kids who are performing as much. So that's so key to then being able to pursue things and to feel included, but also, and sorry, I'm on my soapbox constantly, but we need to also talk about the fact that you've got massive institutions and venues like, I don't want to name any in particular, but you do get that sense of like, oh, black artist XYZ is playing at Royal Albert Hall or at and there's this feeling of like, what an accomplishment. I can't believe that someone who looks like that is playing at a place like this. And that's really where it comes down to. It's like there's very much a sense of there are certain spaces for certain people. And if you do pass through that threshold, it's a massive accomplishment, because there's simply no one who looks like you performing at those places. And that is, that trickles down, that comes from that lack of opportunity all the way down to the grassroots venues. So if there is more inclusivity at those stages, then hopefully that translates more into this like more organic growth rather than this idea of tokenism or like, oh, this one guy did it, so it's okay to do that other thing. It can become more of a, it can actually be diverse and balanced without having to be tokenistic, which I think, just touching a bit on the previous point about tokenism, I think it will be a necessary evil in our plight towards more equal lineups, in the same way that 6-7 years ago you had the same thing happen with gender inclusion in lineups. There was definitely a lot of token kind of same name, or like, that often white female is going to be on like all of these lineups, and it's all very inclusive, but it didn't feel like that at the time. But if you then fast forward, that has definitely been some improvement on those things. So yeah, necessary evil is kind of where my mind is at, but I'll reassess in about 6 months.
Is there kind of feeling that as an industry, there's only a sense of being able to tackle one thing at a time? Like, you're obviously just talking about gender splits. So what I've kind of felt like is that gender splits, it had to be tackled first. Now we're having this conversation, but like, I believe everything should be able to be, quantified and sorted out essentially. But is there a sense of one thing at a time?
Hello. So when the gender splits were happening, we had some artists that would quantify it on their rider when we sent it out to shows, saying that they wanted the lineups to be 50% male, 50% female, or something like that. With this, there's a little bit more resistance to put an actual percentage down there. So I think what a few booking agencies have been discussing is just putting in a diversity and inclusion policy and contracts when we send them out, to spark a conversation with promoters and to get them to just have a think before they've put this entire lineup together. Because you'd be surprised, look, with all the Black Lives Matter movement taking international headlines, we're still seeing festivals that are completely white, and it's just really, you feel like, we really got to drum this into people's heads, because they're not listening still. They're still not listening. So I think something in the paperwork that we send as a booking agency can help spark the conversation, and I think it just needs to be something that's brought up a few times, during the negotiations, just looking at the entire lineup. I've had that before, and I'm like, it doesn't look that diverse, guys. And then they go back and they think about it, and they send me a revised version. So yeah, we've probably got to do, as what Karen says, is the necessary evil of tokenism, but let's make sure that everybody's compensated for that. So that's,
yeah, it will require a lot of extra work. From my side, we're working on a diversity clause, which is, it's not an easy thing to do, because you want to make sure that artists don't feel like they're in the place just because of their skin color, to fill some sort of quota. But what is really necessary is, of course, the paperwork is really important, but if you don't get buy-in from enough people, especially, we're talking about bigger agencies that will be enforcing these things, who actually do have the power on most of these lineups. I think, actually, was it last year or something, that it was this really funny poster, the Coachella poster, that was kind of broken down by agency, and it was quite interesting to see. I think for a lot of people it was a aha moment, and for me it was just that's my life every day moment. But you do see that there's these major agencies that do hold a lot of the power. They do dictate a lot of these lineups. So unless you get buy-in from people of that size, it will make things quite difficult. But I think you do have to start somewhere. So at the moment, I'm mostly trying to kind of get enough agencies on board so that we can kind of at least have a group of people that are like, hey, we really want this to be a thing, and we want these conversations to be happening. So I think that's the starting point. That the onus can't just be on us as booking agents. It needs to be on the artists to get to a place where they actually say no to bookings. The picket line is made of all of us, where you kind of go like, no, I don't want to play that show. And you do that enough times that you become known for it. And then you become known for that. Other artists might feel emboldened to do so. And it's kind of, that's how change happens. You kind of see it happen with someone, and then you kind of follow suit. And hopefully then there's enough of a momentum, which like Lucy said, I was hoping we would be there with everything that's going on. But we're not quite yet, but we're definitely on the way, I think. My most optimistic days, anyway.
Go on, Angela, sorry.
Just about the one thing at a time. I spent 2019, 2018 on a panel for women talking about gender equality. Spending this year doing this. I don't want to be on another panel next year talking about the LGBT community, because now it's their turn to be on lineups. You know, we at BBC Introducing, and why I love it so much, because it is for everyone. So when, you know, we're speaking to artists and playing artists just because we're listening to their music, we don't know where they're from, and that conversation is always had about sharing these artists that are just really good. And I feel like being part of that team has made me more open-minded and made me more aware of my track listing, and then looking at other track listing and going, oh, that person fits in here and that person does this. And we do like a playlist, especially during lockdown, we had like playlists, and we're able to celebrate Pride, and it's just, we're running out of space because we've got so many LGBT artists that we play them anyway, but now we can highlight and spotlight them because it's Pride, and we know that, and they're part of being interviewed, and we can always have that journey with those artists. And I just think, you know, if we can do that, and it's just so easy, can everyone just do that? And, you know, can we do that across the country and make ripples in the music industry and in the community to say, artists are artists, they're making music, and that's what the offer is for us to buy into that. And you know, we want to use that to say, you know, booking agents or whoever, listen to our shows, because here are the artists that for some reason venues are not booking these artists. Here are all the artists. You can't have an excuse to say, well, I couldn't find this artist, or we tried our best to look, because we're giving you every single week. We've got, you know, 36 shows across the UK of artists that are a mixed bag. So I feel like that, I just love that job. And I would love to see in the future that we're not having these conversations anymore. And if we are, we're not all having it because we're obviously passionate about it, but we're having it with people that use those comments that, oh well, we tried, or, oh, we sent an email and nobody replied. We're just not having those comments anymore. This is the work we're doing. Either join us or you will get left behind, and it won't work anymore. Artists will stop saying yes.
That's such a brilliant point, Angel, because the thing is, like, I feel a lot of people that I've spoken to kind of, not necessarily an excuse, but they kind of play it off as, we don't have access. You know, it's really hard for us to find these things, but Google is free and it's not that hard. Like I've done a lot of research the last few months into loads of different facets of the independent industry. And I don't have access. I've worked in an all-white space for 10 years. Like, I work in a guitar space. Often when I go to a gig, some person will come up to me like, why are you here? Because I just like don't understand why that I could like guitar music, you know? And I've sat and researched, and that's how I've kind of like fortified my knowledge and seen where people might, you know, be coming up against barriers. But it's such a valid point, you know, it's not that hard to just listen to a radio show or to just look in a different place, and you could easily just kind of make everything more diverse for whatever you're trying to do yourself. I just want to take it back to venues for a bit now. I want to talk about the crew and the gig goers, because one of the chats that I've been having with independent artists is talking about how grassroots venues can make spaces more inclusive. So I think that part of that is, I mean, I don't know if you all do this, but I always do this. I go into a venue, I look at the security and I look at the staff and I look at the crew. That's what I do to make sure that I'm in a safe situation. That seems really extreme, I know, but it's just something I've always had to do. And I think that if you see people that look like you automatically feel more comfortable, right? And it's the same kind of thing that Angel was saying earlier about lineups. If you see people who look like you playing on lineups, it makes you feel more comfortable to go there. So what is the disconnect between having, besides geographically, obviously, what is the disconnect between having those people employed at venues and having artists come? Because as we said, you know, we've mentioned security, and I think we've all probably seen that at events where Black artists or POC artists are playing, there tends to be a heightened sense of security around. Does anyone want to speak on that?
Yeah, I'll just make a point that literally we've had Black artists show up at venues before, get to the door who are playing that night and get turned away by security and have had to go home. Like, this is a conversation we've had with a few Black artists in different countries, including the UK. So I think there needs to be like a big revolution in the way that clubs are kept secure, that the security people are trained. Because I know that I think there was an instance at one club that we'd reported the security team. They said, okay, we've got rid of that security team. We've got a new one in. But the same security people were working for that firm as well. And I don't know whether the onus goes on the promoter to train them or the venue to train them, but just like something as simple as just showing a picture of the people that are going to play that night to the security guard and saying, you know, be nice to them when they come here. They're working here. Some things like that need to definitely be revolutionized, because it can be quite a hostile space for people of color, particularly Black people, to want to enter these venues. Yeah.
Yeah, it's yeah. I'm trying to be careful with the words I'm using, but it is all of the, white supremacy does exist in every mainstream space. It shouldn't happen in grassroots venues, because, you know, these venues, these spaces more than others should be all about inclusion, and, you know, you should feel safe at this area and stuff. But the fact that it doesn't happen there shows how deep the problem actually is. I'm quite lucky to work with some promoters who are quite radical in the way that they do things. They do train. They do offer to train security. They do offer to. They make a point of arriving at whatever place they're making the party like a day before and actually doing something that is community based. So it's kind of like, we're here not just to use the space, but to actually translate this space into a community area. It's not just about the party. It's not just about the show. It's about people feeling like this is a place where they can do something like this. And if we show that it is possible to go into a venue that often may have these kind of structures that are a little bit, that you may feel oppressed in, or like, oh, I don't go there because the security is too aggy, or like, I don't feel comfortable because I'm often the only Black person in, and they kind of look at me funny. If you're a promoter who makes the effort of communicating with the venue very clearly on like what it is that you want to do and what you want to make sure your punchers feel when they come in, that is a massive step. Because then, you know, yes, of course, it'd be great to show the photo of the person who's performing just to make sure they actually get in, but that in itself is kind of bizarre. You know, like, you shouldn't have to do that. So the hope is that if you do have these conversations with security staff who may have never had these sort of conversations, I think you have to give people the benefit of the doubt that they will actually take that in. And if they don't take it in, then they are held accountable, because then you can say, we did go through all of these things. We did explain how we wanted things to go, and this happened. So, you know, you were in full knowledge of what this space was meant to be, and yet you made sure to still act in an oppressive way. And that is what we need to start doing, you know, holding people accountable at every single level of staff. And then once that happens, I think people of color will feel more inclined to actually go for those jobs, because they're kind of like, oh, I see that X venue is making sure that, you know, they're really following through with the safe space thing, and I want to make sure that my community feels safe in those spaces as well. So me being present as a security person or as a bar person, whatever it is, might contribute to that. So it could be, again, like this kind of domino effect of good stuff, hopefully, because tired of the domino effect of bad stuff. We've had enough of that.
Angel, did you want to say anything on that?
I haven't got anything specifically to say about the crew and staff, but just going off of Lucy's point about artists, you know, not getting kicked out or whatever. I once had a gig where I performed, And it was a really good gig, and it was one I was really excited about. I was waiting for ages, and then by the end of the night, there was an altercation with just other people that were there that I knew, because it's a really small place where we live, and everybody knows each other. Anyway, they got kicked out. I got kicked out, and then I got banned from the venue. And what makes me sad about that is, I wrote a status up about it, and they kind of use that as you're banned because you wrote a status. I said, well, the venue shouldn't have me on Facebook to see my own personal status, so that makes no sense. But let's call it what it is. It's not because of that. But what makes me sad about that is when the promoter was telling you got to take it down. I wasn't protected in that situation. I was kind of left to hang, left out to dry, not allowed in that place. And the security there were security at a couple of other places, so I couldn't go to like a couple of places for something I wasn't even involved with. Like, it made no sense. But then what made me sad was, obviously recently with the Blackout Tuesday thing and people posting the black square. And when I saw someone who was linked to that situation post that square, I thought, are you serious? Do you know how that I have always thought about that situation that happened and how that's made me feel, and how I can be brave now because we're all having these uncomfortable conversations, but I didn't feel brave enough then to have that conversation about how uncomfortable I felt and how that was linked to race, not because of a status, and why seeing that black square with no explanation, it was kind of just a hashtag, no explanation of I've done some things in the Bible and I want to learn and blah blah blah. It blew my mind, and I found that there was a lot of black square stuff that was like coming from industry. I've had conversations with about, can you be more diverse, or can you what does that square mean, when I can explain a situation that has hurt me and I will tell that story every time. Are we going to speak about that now? Like, when is the right time for you to apologize now? Because the black square isn't taken back that situation. But what it is opening up the dialogue. But again, we've spoken about, we can't keep doing all the work. That has to come to me or to my community and say, oh my gosh, I've done X, Y, and Z, and I've done hip hop gigs, and I'm not from that black community. So what should I do to be better and not be the token white in the hip hop scene?
And also, just to add something to your experience, I think it's also coming to terms with what that actually means. It wasn't, coming to terms with this thing of like something that is completely out of my control, the situation, plus something that is also out of my control, the color of my skin, and then what you getting banned actually meant. It didn't mean you getting banned from the venue. It was a message. It gives the message of like, this isn't really a space for someone like you. And then what you carry through your entire life, even though it's something that you're like, oh, I didn't feel comfortable talking about it, you internalize all of that stuff. And you just feel less inclined to become a part of those spaces. And that is the bottom line of a lot of this conversation about like, oh, like we don't hire the black staff because like no one applies for that job, or like there's no black promoters, so there's no black. That's because there is historically this message of these spaces aren't really for someone like you. Whether people do that intentionally or not, you don't have to shout it, but you do uphold it through your actions. And if you don't make an effort as a venue to seek that out, and then if there aren't those things, those people available, you make sure that they do become available. You make sure to be like, okay, there aren't black promoters in my area. That's kind of crazy. Let me make sure that we reach out to the black community and we get them into internships with promoters, and then they become actual parts of those teams, and then eventually it becomes about representation. So one episode that someone might be like, oh, maybe it wasn't really a race thing, maybe it was something that happened. It doesn't really matter. It's the long-lasting effects of it. It's not the one thing, it's what it does to your entire perspective from that point onwards.
A lot of venues have, I've researched a bunch of venues, and a lot of venues have commitments to zero tolerance or equality clauses on their websites. Do we think that just publicly displaying those kind of clauses is enough? Or because, Angel just mentioned that an incident that happened to her, and I know a lot of incidents have happened to myself and other friends, and you report it and nothing gets done, or you get penalized for it. So what is the way that we can stop that from happening? If a venue is going to commit to that kind of zero tolerance, how can venues carry that through? Because they, you know, having anyone in your space, you have a duty of care to look after them, right?
I can jump in. I think it would have been great to have a Black person that's connected to a venue in this call, but then again, there's not that many. And I think what will be, and that's me kind of repeating myself a little bit, but what you need to do is have systems in place that are completely transparent. And it's like saying that your zero tolerance is all fine and great, but all it does is kind of market. It's a marketing thing where you're selling yourself as like, we're an open space, but it's like, I can call myself an open space, but if I don't have the actual systems in place, or it's like, okay, if something does happen, these are the steps and these are the people that will be looking into that. And it kind of feels like that, where it's like you report something and then it kind of like disappears into the ether and you don't really know where that complaint went, if anyone has been held accountable. And the thing is that a lot of these situations aren't, racism a lot of the time isn't tangible. These like, you know, that's why we talk about microaggressions. We talk about, you know, looked at when you're in like a shop, a fancy shop, and you walk in and you feel it's a feeling and it's a look, and it's a hard thing to translate to someone because it opens the space for it to be debatable. Oh, maybe it wasn't, maybe you just kind of read it that way because you were already feeling a certain way. And then it kind of becomes this like vicious circle of just, oh, maybe I'm being too sensitive about it. And I think if venues open means of communication where people can kind of not just complain, but actually share experiences and be like, I kind of felt this way, and take it on board, have systems in place to train staff, and have actual staff on site who deals with that sort of stuff, kind of in the same way that you have the harm reduction, you have harm reduction stuff in a lot of like electronic music festivals now because of drug taking. So you do have these people who are specifically there. If you're having a difficult time with a drug experience, you can go to them. So maybe there's something that can be put in place where there's someone that you can actually go and report to, instead of feeling like you have to go into speaking to the manager mode, which often leads to nothing, basically.
Well, they've got that thing, don't they, in pubs? Is it, do you ask for Angela at the bar? Yeah. 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 So you do that when there's like a creepy guy or something speaking to you?
Yeah.
Maybe, yeah, more protocols like that could be put into place. I think it's all well and good to say we have zero tolerance, but then there needs to be something to back it up with there, and to make sure that a result has actually occurred at the end and everyone's kept up to date on the outcome of the situation and there's some accountability held. So yeah, I think it's difficult sometimes for people, to know who to tell that will actually do anything about it in these cases. Yeah. Yeah.
Do we think that, I mean, obviously, you know, I think we've probably all been talking a lot about allyship training and unconscious bias training. I don't think necessarily small venues have the means to, you know, train their staff in that way. Do we now look at like a trade body, like the trust, to be able to kind of regulate that kind of training?
Yeah.
Yeah,
yes.
Well, like, I'm just kind of thinking, you know, if you're a small venue, like 100, 150 cap, you don't have like a ton of staff, right? But you do need to make sure that those staff are aware. And if you want to, you know, commit to zero tolerance and actually have a process by which any incidents can get efficiently handled, how will the venue facilitate having that kind of training? Because you obviously need that to be supplied across like your, you know, all of your staff, your security. And I guess like what I've been looking into is trying to see how the trade bodies could potentially help in, you know, certain situations in terms of venues, you know, in terms of independent operators within the sphere. But I don't really, this is probably a dead end question, guys, sorry.
Where I'm based, we have a venue which is 80 cap. It's an awesome little venue, but it's attached to a community interest company. So I feel like there's two things there that can be done that are being done at the moment, and that I think it's a teaching moment for other venues if it works. But I think the first thing is listening to if you've got Black people or people of color, their experience of life from growing up all the way to the person they are today, the things, whether it's that story of me getting kicked out here, but the internalized moments that have happened that have shaped the perspective that I have today, and why, if I'm a volunteer at this venue and it's a certain night, here's the reasons why I don't want to volunteer this night, because I don't feel as comfortable, because these things have happened, and blah, blah, blah. So I think listening to other people and their experiences and how they feel it should go, it should be better. The other thing is having community groups use the space when it's not being used as a venue to have it as a safe space for youth work or for mentorship schemes, I don't know, streaming a film, whatever, using that space. So and again, this goes back to the ambitions and people who are working in that space. If you bring a 15-year-old kid who likes to rap in a venue that usually has guitar bands, he might go, oh, so people perform here and I want to perform there. And it completely changes his perspective. He will see it as his space in the daytime, not have a clue what goes on in the evening. But then eventually there's that crossover where the worlds meet, and it can completely change someone's life. And I feel really strongly about giving people, you know, I went to youth club. I'm brought up in the youth club, and it definitely shaped everything I do today. We did radio workshops, we did music workshops, we did, you know, we went on trips, we went to places that my mum would never take me to these places. So I feel like where we've lost youth clubs, we've got spaces which are venues where we can have people in doing workshops, masterclasses, roller skating, whatever it is, but giving people that space where it's safe and they tell their friends, I go to this place and we can just do whatever, and it's not home, but it's not the street, it's not outside, and it's safe. Eventually when they're old enough, and that can start a journey of, can we put on gigs, underage gigs, can we put on under 18 nights, eventually to, I want to rap or I want to be a musician, can I perform here, this will be my first gig. That journey is incredible, and I've seen it happen. And once that, you know, and I wanted to make this point earlier about, it's just a little bit off topic, but I remember in 2007, I love grime, yeah. I remember in 2007, BBC Proms, and Gets was on stage. I literally couldn't even believe it. And, you know, there's been loads of others, but it was for me that moment of, I love music, I love all kinds of music, I love guitar music, I love whatever, but I love grime, and mashing it together to grime fans might just be weird. But for someone who likes both worlds, that came together at that moment. So when venues have this, oh, we had, you know, we've got this one Black person, yeah, we've had, and should be applauded for that. When you do things like that, you make it ambitious for people like me and people that look like that person to want to get on that stage. That was 2007. I don't know what's been happening since. I haven't really kept up with it. But Stormzy headlined Glastonbury last year. That is humongous for UK Black British culture. Now, if that 15-year-old in that venue has watched Stormzy on a stage like that, it would make no sense to him why he can't even get a gig in his own local area. He wouldn't even understand. And when you start those microaggressions that start happening there, you kind of strip away the ambition of, I can perform at Glastonbury, because now he might have to move to a different place and get gigs at different venues that enable him to have that journey, because he saw someone who's Stormzy that looks like him, who does grime, performing at a place where you know that's not, we haven't. He was the first UK Black British rap artist, because Skunk and Nancy performed as well. But you know the culture has changed, and you know rap music is at the forefront. It's in the top 40 charts. It's the most streamed. Like, it's doing so well. People like Drake, you know, international artists collaborating with a drill artist like Heady One. These are massive waves. But if you can't see that at grassroots level, it's going to take us so long for the next UK Black artist to be on Glastonbury that isn't doing grime, that's just doing another that's just doing another genre of music that happens to be Black. So yeah, I just wanted to put all that, mash that together.
Loved it. Go on, Karen, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just in the subject of, I understand especially now, I think everyone's kind of a bit like, oh, but I got to make all these changes now. And it's like, well, you should have been making those changes already. So I guess you just have more to catch up on. And I have a lot of feelings about bureaucracy as a concept. I think bureaucracy is often, it's just a nice word for just excuses. You know, you create all of these obstacles to make sure that you kind of gain enough time to make those changes, or not, or it becomes too complicated and it's like, oh, we just don't have the means for it. And I understand in some cases it's not easy, especially when you're talking about grassroots venues who are already massively underfunded, and they are just completely, and just talking about the UK, obviously, you know, being annihilated by a government that simply does not care. But we do have to, if we're going to be grassroots, then we got to be grassroots. So if you don't have the money to do this whole staff thing that is official, be DIY about it. There's so much available that you could compile enough information to share with your staff just to make sure that those conversations are happening. They don't have to be official trade body confirmed, because I think once you get into that, then it gives you this sort of excuse to like, oh, we just don't have the structure to make something like that happen. I think change is within everyone's reach. You just have to really measure what amount of change you're able to make, and then if you're operating in the community sort of level, then you can tap into your own community. That's where these conversations need to happen. It's not just with your staff, it's with your punters. It's not just with your punters, it's with the local artists. And it's like, then it becomes the conversation that is outside of the regulated conversations that make things official. Because then otherwise it just becomes a check on a list. And I don't know that that's enough at this point. I think we need to go a bit deeper than that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's a really, really great point. You know, sometimes I do think bureaucracy is used as a means of control and to keep everyone in their lane and keep them in their place, essentially. So if, you know, people are creating communities and people are in certain communities really creating a sense of togetherness, and it's people from all different backgrounds, all different sexual identities, and that's really important. And I think if people can just, you know, try and lead that change within their community starting first, then as you say, it will definitely like filter through, trickle down. What else can we talk about? I wanted to like have a little chat about like going back to the promoter conversation, just because we touched on that at the start, but we hadn't really talked about it. In London, I only know white male promoters and I think a couple of female promoters. I know that you guys is, you know, the places that you kind of work in are not necessarily London based, but like you work across, you know, a lot of different countries and areas. So I wanted to kind of speak on that and how much diversity you see within those promoter communities. Yeah. Lucy, do you want to take this?
Sorry, can you just recap the last bit of that, please?
Oh yeah. So just like I just mentioned like the London promoter community, and obviously because I work in a predominantly guitar music world, I see a couple of white female promoters, but mostly white men, and you know, that's kind of where my space is in London. But I wanted you guys to just speak a bit about what you see in the areas that you work in terms of
that translates pretty much all over Europe, I think. It's a very small handful female for female promoters, and for people of color promoters, it's a very small handful, but I'm trying to broaden my network now as well. So hit me up in my inbox if you're watching, guys. Yeah, it's another one of these boys clubs that I think, yeah, typically men just see other men doing this job, so they think that it just seems more appropriate for them to do these roles. But what I have seen a little bit more is females like getting into assisting them at the bottom. So hopefully in a few years' time, we might see a little bit of a shift. I've seen a little bit of that, but yeah, you're right. And I think even in terms of like just all behind the scenes, we need to look at the diversity across all of that, not just promoters. We need to look at booking agents. We need to look at the record labels. We need to look at PR. Because, yeah, often I'll go to like something like Eurosonic and I'll go to a diversity panel run by white males. Yeah, like that totally happened to me, and I thought I was in the Twilight Zone. And I was like,
yeah.
Sorry, we're about to run out of time, so I just want to go around and everyone give a final thought of what they'd like to see for this time next year.
I'd like diversity to become just like almost just normal, not even something that we need to throw in everyone's face. I'd just like it to be considered. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's for me.
Seek Black people out. We're literally here. Just employ us and put us in positions of power, and I'm sure that we'll make some great things with that.
I'd say this year, diversity. I don't want to see next year biversity, and next year's topic is LGBTQ rights and inclusivity. I want, hire more people, listen to people's experiences, and let's be ambitious with just
and read about intersectionality, because that could really we don't have to be talking about these things separately. Just intersection. It's a better, easier way. We tackle things multifaceted. We can do it. The brain is a wonderful thing.
Thanks for having me. It's been a great chat.
Thanks to all the panelists. It's been great chatting with you all. And thanks to everyone that tuned in. Have a good rest of your day.
See you later.
Yeah.